Hi, hello everyone. My name is Agnieszka Balcer-Thinlay and I'm a researcher. I'm also a beginner in terms of online presentations, and on top of it, it's my first presentation that I'm doing sitting down. It's going to be a big challenge for me. Let's hope it goes well. A few words about myself. I've been working in research for many years now. And when I say research, I mean working both with qualitative data as well as quantitative data, as well as data science. It all comes down to basically finding information and the right answer to the hopefully right question. And that's my role in the companies that I'm with. I was lucky enough to create a research team in both of my previous companies, including Codility, which I'm with now. And while working, I had to answer some very basic questions for myself. And one of those questions I would like to share with you today. The question is, should a researcher be a part of the developer team or not? And basically, it's a story about how you could get more from research in your company. Why it's a question? It's probably because there is no single solution that fits all, and that there shouldn't be. All our companies are different. But I wanted to share with you different perspectives. And also, heads up, I was starting this presentation thinking of my own experience and what worked and what didn't work for me. But while doing those slides, I have discovered that actually other experts in my company have undergone similar challenges and have to answer similar questions for themselves. So it may turn out that this story is not necessarily about researchers only, but there could be other expert roles that could fit within that theme. I will try to illustrate it in the following slides. Just to give you a bit of background to why some of the questions that I was answering for myself were important for me. Some time back, I worked for a very big corporate organization with very well-established verticals and multiple teams that were delivering information. And all of them brilliant. We have user experience team, we had marketing research, we had BI, and we had customer success management team that also was producing a lot of insights around the customers. And with them doing really good job, in the same time, I was struggling with how much information was getting lost between those teams. And I suffered from the lack of cooperation between those people who were generating information. And that really influenced my mindset, I think, which I took with me to my next company, a rapidly growing software company, not a startup anymore, but definitely still very flexible and in the making. It was a beautiful place for me because I was the first researcher there, and I tried to deliver value, and it was so easy because with every piece of information I was bringing, there was a wow effect. I was the first person there. These were the first answers we were seeing. We were moving forward every day. This is also the first place where I heard words like Agile or SCRUM. And that's basically, that picture shows how I felt when I encountered them. I had to figure it out, what it means for me to work within those frameworks. But it was fairly easy when I was a single researcher, just starting the research efforts within the company. The real challenge started when there were more people in the research roles joining Codility. So at that point, what happened is that product managers came out with a suggestion that those researchers should join their developer teams, because by the design, the developer team should be self-sufficient, meaning it should include all the roles that are necessary to deliver the product increment that they are designed to do. And that idea gave me a pause. Because definitely that model can work for some. And I can imagine it working very well, for example, in the situation when you have very quick development cycles. If your researcher is immersed in the team and the team is delivering quickly, then the researcher lives in a constant cycle of exploration, testing ideas, tuning in ideas, and verifying whether they work on production. So this is really very useful to have one on board at that point. Another scenario in which this kind of immersed in the team model works well is when the teams are responsible for very well-defined domains and have well-defined KPIs within those domains. They know what they want to accomplish. For example, they want to double the usage of certain feature, and this is what they want to do. So in such scenario, the researcher within the team can both support the current development efforts, as well as in case of any, pauses or lack of work for themselves, explore the domain further to the point when they are ultimate experts and they can inspire the product manager and the team in terms of taking new solutions that could drive them towards their KPIs, toward reaching their targets. So this is also very useful then, to have a researcher that is immersed in that domain. And finally, another scenario when you have a very big volume of usage of your product. And with that, you can build very quick feedback loops and you can learn from them and constantly improve. So if you can do A/B testing, if you can have multiple versions of solutions on production and then tune them in, or retire some of them based on the data that you get back, then the researcher has plenty on their plate. But what if your company does not fit that model? What if it's different? For example, what if your company needs answers to strategic questions and they need very high level, they ask very high level questions and they want to know, for example, what is the decision-making process of the customer, that is not very domain specific, right? Question. What is the customer journey with your product? These kind of discoveries are challenging when the researchers are completely immersed in certain topics and don't have the space to do anything outside of them. What if your company have long development cycles? So it takes a long time for an idea to get from paper to actually be live on production. At that point, researcher is very useful at the, while framing the question and putting it on the table. And then it's a very useful partner for figuring out the potential solutions and testing the potential of those. Maybe some partial deliveries can be tested, but other than that, there is a lot of waiting for the researcher, like what else can I bring to the table? And perhaps there needs to be some work searched for outside of the team because the researcher has nothing to do for a week or 2 or 3. And what if there are more teams in your company than there are researchers? That's a very realistic scenario, right? Especially for software. Like with software, you definitely need developers. These are the first role you're taking care of. You're probably having product managers to help those developers move forward in the right direction. If you're smart, you're having designers because they provide the ultimate experience, and then the researchers come somewhere there. So in that scenario, if the researcher is immersed, then basically the teams try to borrow a researcher from time to time, and that is a very difficult model for the researchers themselves and not very effective for the teams. And this scenario can take place with more than just a research role. So I can see testers being in similar positions, and that happened in my company, for example, where QA testers were, outnumbered. There were fewer of them than the actual teams, and they had to figure out ways to of working with one team, but also trying to, take short breaks and join another team, and that was not very effective. So what happens then? What can you do then? And my suggestion is consider alternatives. And those alternatives are not, it's not actually a single option, it's a spectrum of options that you can take into consideration. So on one side, you have those immersed in the team model, which we have just discussed. So this is when the researcher or another expert is completely within a team, fully focused on a team, and this is where they work, full stop. But alternatively, you could consider moving this researcher role a little bit outside of the team and creating a space for the researchers to work together, for example, as a strong guild. And in that model, that doesn't mean that the researchers should meet once a week for an hour and exchange information on what they are doing. That's not it. That's not working together. It should be at least a day, or maybe even 2 days a week, depending on your needs, where they can support each other and run projects that are not necessarily specific to a domain. And then the last model at the other part of the spectrum is actually moving these expert roles. In my case, these are researchers, completely outside the team, having a separate team that actually cooperates on daily basis with the developer teams. How it could work? Well, for example, in our case, if you have 3 researchers, each of them shadows a single or 2 teams, developer teams, joining their dailies and plannings, and brings back to the researchers all the topics gathered, all the questions the teams are asking, all the doubts they have, all the uncertainties they are facing in their current development process or in the upcoming projects that PM is considering. These topics are put on the table and the researchers are sharing them, supporting each other. Sometimes there are few people solving one problem because that's a big problem and we need more attention on it. And then in other times, we learn from each other how we can solve that. And then in other times, we see that those problems have been already solved some time back and we can deliver the answers to the teams faster. So all this I would like to discuss in detail in the following slides. And by the way, this last model is also the model that was chosen by the testers in my company, not only researchers. So they were the immersed QA testers in the beginning, but since it didn't work, it didn't allow them to produce those systematic improvements to the process. They tried to create space for themselves by becoming a separate team, because all those models which I'm discussing, they ultimately mean one thing. Yes, you need to put more effort in synchronization, either with the developer teams or with each other, that depending on the model you choose. But ultimately what you are creating is you're creating a possibility for the researchers or other experts to work together. And that working together really makes a difference. And I would like to prove it to you. If you go along with any of those models, whether it's a separate team or a strong guild, what it allows you to do, it allows you to cover more ground. So first of all, you're being aware of all the topics that are currently relevant in your company. Every question, all the questions that are being asked in different teams. And that helps you sometimes to answer them faster. I will give you an example of a single UX lab that we did while working on part of our interface. My company provides automated developer testing in hiring process. So basically, we create both interface and tasks that allow to gather better insight in the programming skills of developers. And team was one of the teams was working on a new part of the interface for new types of tasks, and we were strictly focused within that lab on figuring out whether the navigation is intuitive, whether the developers are able to test the code well, find the proper files they needed for solution. So we were very much, user experience oriented. But I knew that another team in the company, in the same time, was considering a new type of tasks, a completely new content that was very much oriented on tasks that you could have on the job, and showing samples of those tasks and solving a sort of a real life problem that you could encounter. And knowing that, we incorporated the example of those tasks in that UX lab. We focused on interface primarily. We discussed it with the participants, we tested it. And after we did it, we had extra 15 minutes on discussing the content of some example tasks that we were considering, even though they were not strictly connected, but they did fit into the same sort of theme, and it helped the other team to move forward as well as the team that worked on the interface. It was a win for all. Another thing that happens in those working together models is that you find useful information by accident very often. And don't get me wrong, that happens in every model you work for within as a researcher, whether you're immersed or not. But the trick is to notice those tiny treasures that are not necessarily relevant at the moment or to the specific topic that you're interested in. In case of our development stories, I remember that we were, for example, looking at the way people created tests in our interface, and our goal was to optimize the flow of the test creation. So we looked in detail at all the actions, and sort of by accident, we learned that when people select task for the test, they use completely different mental model for the tasks than the one we proposed. And that was not at all the focus of the improvement that we were trying to introduce, but we've noticed it, and we knew that another team in our company was generally working on task library, on its structure, and on the tasks that are being released. And we delivered this information there, and that allowed them to change the categorization of our tasks, to both implement that into the interface for the user, but also internally in the company, that we use different categories for the tasks from that moment, and we were more aligned to how the market perceived our content. And finally, last but not the least, this kind of covering more ground also includes finally answering the questions that are not related with current development cycle. So if you have those kind of strategic questions, as I mentioned, customer journeys, decision-making processes, the needs of your target group that are just behind the corner, or exploring new target groups that might be interested in your product, those questions can be answered within those teams. And this is also this kind of level that was missing from the work of our QA testers. That is the another group of experts that I observed. And changing into being a separate team allowed them to introduce certain processes, certain standards, propose improvements for which there was no space while they were immersed. The space was created and the solutions followed. So that's one win. The another one is that basically having this working together opportunity saves you time, because you don't have to do the same work twice. First of all, very often we end up looking for similar pieces of information for different teams, often quantitative data in terms of how many people use this, how they use it, etc. And we could generate the same number 5 times within 2 months, or we could actually be aware that it was already generated and pass it on. We could also include queries, if we use code, for example, for extracting certain data, queries that were already used, and then implement them further. So if we use certain variables for analysis that are repetitive, like active user, then we could have a definition of that and simply reuse that definition, which is code-based, in every analysis that we do. Because what is active user? Is it the person who's currently paying? Is it the person who's paying and actually conducted any kind of action in your application within the last week or a month or 3 months? Or is it the person who reached out and provided some kind of feedback? This is really very contextual, and in the same time, this is a variable that is used by all parts of organization. So it's great if it's consistent, and having those kind of definitions, reusing those parts of code and learning from it, it's only a plus. And then finally, you don't have to answer questions that have already been answered. I have an example from another company that I was in, where the UX team have discovered a very specific behavior on mobiles. And that was really exciting. That was new to them. They put a lot of effort in working with the participants in the discovery project. At that time, there was ethnography, and there were interviews and observations. And the finding, you know, they were excited about the finding. And the challenge was, the problem was that we already knew that the finding was not that unique, because we already had a number of users. We already knew how many users use their mobiles that way. And we've known that for a year in another part of the company. So this lack of flow, information between the researchers, actually made us discover the same information twice with a lot of effort. And that doesn't happen if the information flow is good between the information generating parties. And the third thing that you can gain with this model is easy onboarding to the team. First of all, researchers are only people. We get sick, we take holiday, and sometimes we need to, you know, move around in the company. And in a scenario where a new researcher needs to join the team or assist the team, it's really great if they have already the basic knowledge of what was done for the team, where the team is currently at, what they are doing, what their challenges are. Then the onboarding is very fast and the researcher can bring value quickly. In the same time, information never goes missing. We can go back to data that was produced some time ago, to discovery that was provided a few months back, to explorations or concept testing that we had some time ago, and look for detailed cues that are relevant for currently important questions. So this is really data recycling in the making. However, it's not all perfect. If you use this kind of model, whether these are strong guilds or a separate team, yes, you do cover more ground. In the same time, you might end up covering too much ground. So basically, you deliver more than just answers to current questions, and there are more questions coming from different part of organization. This can be from product, this can be from revenue. This happened to us. Revenue started asking us questions because, you know, you're researchers, you're good with data, sure you can find answers. And these are big, important questions to the company. So we started taking all those questions, and that suddenly created more and more expectations when we were trying to satisfy them, and ended up not delivering the full value anywhere. So at some point, you need to notice that moment when it becomes too much, or hopefully never reach there, just like unlike we did, and stop and refocus and really go back to what your mandate is, or perhaps you want to reorganize. Perhaps you want to, you know, change the role of the team. The solutions are multiple, but if you cover too much ground, it's going to become a problem sooner or later. Another issue that really hit us hard was, you know, this model really makes it possible for us to answer big questions. But while chasing those answers, you can actually miss the tiny questions that are being asked on a daily basis. So this kind of everyday work kind of can you give me the single number, or can you give me this short answer to how that works, on how much users we have here? You can miss that while being focused on bigger themes. And that actually may become a bottleneck for your organization if that happens. So what worked for us in that case, we started working on making the data as available to everyone as possible. So we started automating reports, we started applying interfaces that were allowing you to use the data directly without any researcher's assistance, and provide sort of tool-based support to designers and product managers so that they can also figure out things themselves. But that was, again, a big theme. We didn't notice that happening while it was happening until we reached sort of a tipping point where it already required actions on our side. So be mindful about that. Altogether, though, I believe that in case of my company, the model of a separate team has more advantages than disadvantages. And that brings me to a question. So do all roles need to be included in the developer team? I mean, ultimately, within the team, there is no IT specialist, although it's crucial for all the equipment to work continuously, right, when you work on a project. And no electrician is there. So the researcher, a very important part of the puzzle, do they have to be in the team to actually bring value? And that's the question I would like to leave you with. Thank you so much for your attention.
Wow, thank you very much, Agnieszka. It's been a really interesting talk, and we already have one question from the audience that I would like to ask you right now. And this is, here's the question. How much of a researcher's work is working on the solutions for problems, and how much is only providing data?
I think it depends what solution for problems really means. So I think that it definitely should be a part of researchers' work. So providing data only and the only information provider is very often analytical work. It's very necessary, but going a step further brings a lot of satisfaction and also sometimes solutions that are out of the box for the team. So in terms of the team that I'm working with data science competences, we explore a problem, as an example. We try to understand it and provide numbers for it. So this is the first part that you ask. And this is, I would say, currently, it used to be 80% of our work. We are aiming to limiting it to, let's say, I don't know, 40%, 50% of our work maximum. The rest, however, we try to think of solutions. So if that is the problem we portrayed, and if these are the challenges, what could be potential solutions? And if one of the solutions is within machine learning realm, for example, this is also what we can do. We aim for prototyping something that could be caught up, that could be used by the product in the future to actually solve that specific problem. That's very often a work in progress, so the prototypes are not necessarily production ready. And they require developers' attention, and then sometimes they are also iterated in a way that they change from the prototype to the actual solution. But that gives both the team and the researchers the sense of, I wouldn't say obligation, but it's a sense of responsibility for the outcome, being a part of solution creation as well. So I would say, don't make it less than, and here put a number, but I would say don't make it less than 30% of researchers' time thinking about solutions.
Great, thanks. That sounds really good. I'm also curious if you could maybe tell us a little bit about the different methods of working on the solution as well. So, like, how do you interact with the team, and essentially, how do you participate in creating the solution as a researcher?
So it very much depends on the problem we are solving, because the teams the product team's needs are also vary depending on the solutions we are currently tackling. For example, in terms of exploring ideas, then or verifying ideas, we definitely participate in sort of co-creation phase where we have some understanding of why the solution is coming up, why the designers want to go this direction, what is the philosophy behind it. Sometimes we have option A, B, and C, and our part then is to validate that with the external, with the users, with potential, with people who would actually touch that solution on production once it's there. And that doesn't require us being in the team continuity. So we sync on daily basis, except for dailies. We have special syncs that are just for that specific project. It could be, depending on the challenge, 15 minutes or longer. With the designers, we have briefing sessions where extensively we go through the, for example, mock-ups that are going to be tested. And we try to understand what questions the designers have, what are the unanswered mysteries hidden behind the wireframe tested, so that we can actually probe for these specific answers. Now, if we talk about another type of solution, which is, for example, introducing a machine learning model of our creation to the production, then this cooperation looks completely different. And it's much closer. And it's, I would say, it's even a researcher joining full-time or half-time developer team for as long as it's needed. Sometimes it's a week, sometimes it's 2 weeks, sometimes even longer. So that helps to transfer knowledge, that helps to build, well, more reliable solutions, because we have both the developer expertise as well as the research and the analytical one. So so at that point we kind of shift, and then we have a researcher who's syncing with the research team, but actually working full-time, as I said, or at least half-time with the developers and living as a member of that specific team. So joining the meetings that the team requires and that are driving the development forward.
Great. This is actually touching on the next question that I was curious about, which is, what is your opinion on including a researcher in the Agile product development team? And you partly answered that right now, that with this specific setup, it actually made sense for you. I'm curious if you can think of any other cases, or maybe some pros and cons of this setup that you think or could or know of and could share with us here today.
I think a lot of it is covered in the presentation itself, but just to summarize it all, I think this setup really works for specific teams, for specific type of teams, right? Having a researcher within the team is definitely very empowering for teams that have domain specific KPIs that are responsible for very well-defined parts of product, and they understand what they need to deliver there in terms of outcome and not just feature. So with that, a researcher is a powerful member of the team that can help to drive those KPIs forward, because they support the current development, but also can inspire solutions that allow us to meet the KPIs, that the solutions that have not been discussed yet within the team, because they discover things, they understand better, they become experts in the domain. With very quick feedback loops on the, for example, software that you're producing. So if you can do A/B testing, that is also a lot of additional work in not only exploration, but also validation. So with all this, it definitely makes sense to have a researcher on the team. Though, as I mentioned in the presentation, I do believe that we need to provide researchers a platform to work with each other, sort of outside of the teams. And this is And yeah, so that's something that I definitely believe brings value.
Okay, thanks for this. This is a really interesting problem, and we actually have another question from the public. Do you think a designer can design if they are not a part of research, meaning they are not only the consumer of the research report?
Can they? I'm sure they can. Should they? That is another question. So I'm sure there are many ways to approach it. I can tell you some of the experiences I have from the current company that I'm working with. When we conduct any kind of research that is that will be potentially consumed by designers, meaning we are not working on internal usage analytics. We are kind of working, for example, on flows, or we are trying to understand behavior of customers in specific areas in the product. These are just examples. We work with designers, we sync with designers continuously within that project. So we talk with them before we start anything. So again, we have a briefing session. We try to understand, we try to share our perspective, our ideas, and understand the problems that they are facing so that we incorporate it. And then we run the research and we share partial results. That is very important. It's just like making small merge requests as a developer versus one huge one at the end. So we don't want to deliver final report and just here you go, read it, consume it, and ask a question. We try to share partial results. So this is what we discovered this week or this last few days. And what do you think? Do you have additional questions? So that we iterate on the scope of the analytics that we are trying to run to better fit the designer's needs and to answer their specific questions that they have. There must be a limit, obviously. The search could be endless, but this is what we are trying to do. So actually, at the end, when they receive the report, they are not consumers. They have been a part of that journey throughout this product. On top of that, I really believe that if we run any kind of validation sessions for ideas, for example, or explorations trying to understand the needs, the designers should be part of those interviews. So it's great if they receive a report, but in our organization, they are always invited to participate. It's their choice whether they do it or not. They very often choose to join, to listen and ask additional questions. There is a researcher running the session, but they are sort of in the room and trying to get a better perspective and grasp the details and hear the tone of the voice. And what we even introduced is, a special system of sort of, I wouldn't say notes, but it's like a table of observations that are used by the designers who are listening to the interviews for them to write down or code or mark numbers of whatever they are observing, or whether comment on specific topic appeared or not. And then we have I wouldn't say semi-quantified, maybe it's too much, but it's a very good reference point for debrief, for understanding what actually was discovered, for discussing what is the meaning of it, for making sure we all see the same picture. And also it gives space for asking, well, that's not what I heard, or that's not how I understood this, right? For me as a researcher, I'm not able to follow the conversation, to make notes on top of that, to organize logistics around recording, and then make the respondents still feel engaged, and that my attention is solely focused on them. And that's my goal when I have this kind of conversations. So the designers are extremely valuable partners in that process. Up to a point, I believe that if they are willing to, they can be trained and actually take lead some of the interviews themselves. That's obviously a dangerous endeavor a little bit if they are authors of the projects they are testing. So with any kind of, so there's this kind of risk there. But so far, I've never seen it fail the way we do it. I'm very pleased with this collaboration.
This is great to hear, and I think it's an inspiration for many research teams out there. One other thing I'm really curious about is in your organization right now, and probably in organizations of many of our participants of the conference today, the research team is collaborating with a number of product development teams, agile product development teams. So I'm really curious, what are your experiences in, managing this sort of relationship with a number of teams, and I imagine somehow prioritizing their work, et cetera, if you could share a little bit of your view on that.
I would say it's still work in progress. I don't have any golden solutions around that. What I'm learning more and more to do as a researcher is I'm trying to have a thorough understanding of how important the questions that we are asked are. So for example, somebody is asking me about a specific feature, and I'm trying to understand why it's specifically important today, why it's specifically important at the moment. Is it related to a KPI that the team has this month or this quarter? Is it, are we firefighting something? I'm trying to understand what is the meaning behind it, because if we are preparing for a project that we consider in 3 months' time, then I believe this data definitely should be provided, but maybe I don't have to do it now. Maybe there are more important things to handle at the moment, and this can be, this can be one of those things that I do next week or in 2 weeks' time. So I understand why things are important now, and what is the what do we want to do with this information? And I will give you an example. It's very important. What is the outcome that the team wants to achieve asking for data? So once we were asked about usage of a specific feature, and we all knew it's a marginal feature, it's not a big thing. We checked it, obviously delivered a number like that. 5 minutes, here you go, very effective. 2 days later, this feature disappeared from the system, which was announced because nobody uses it. It had like 0.01% use, just like something really minor. And everyone was very happy because we should definitely eliminate the features that we don't use. Unfortunately, we were not aware that this was the purpose for which we were providing the data, and therefore we couldn't add this very important piece of information: who is this 0.01% who uses it? And it was our most valuable customer, who really made a lot of fuss about losing one of the features they were using on a daily basis.
Yes.
We're the only ones. And I know leads us to a discussion, should such features be kept, even with a very limited number of users? But that's another topic. Because perhaps if the team, and if we asked the right question, we would know why they want to have this data. So understanding why is also very very crucial, especially if this kind of questions appear outside of daily team conversations, because we are on dailies every day. So we know what the team is working on today and what kind of questions they have today regarding their process. And this type of questions, they can appear at any time, right? But if they are not part of this discussion, which is a systematic discussion, then obviously there is a risk we deliver something, or the decisions are taken not in an optimal way.
So do I understand you correctly that a representative of the research team is joining dailies of Agile product development teams? Therefore, in order to understand what the team is working on, what questions they might have, or what problems they're stumbling upon, even though they're not formally part of those teams, but they are joining the dailies to kind of be up to date. And you chose this method of kind of an often and short communication of a daily meeting to kind of have this understanding.
Yes, that's definitely, it's a very valuable source of information for both sides, because the team is able to share their needs even if they are not aware of them, if we hear a conversation that leads to a question, for example, we hear people quarreling about a specific aspect of the solution that actually can be answered by a number, that is the question we ask. So do you need a number for that? Do we need to check it? And then the other thing that researchers gain, and this is very important, and this is something that can really get lost if we are very spread out, is how the product is changing in the front end, but also in the back end. And it's very important because it changes the structure of the data we are deriving our data from, we are learning from, and on top of which some interfaces for data interpretation are actually set up. And if this structure changes without us knowing that, that leads to machine learning models flanking and analytics being absent suddenly from certain areas, and the system dependencies are there. So being in those conversations regularly really helps us to prepare for those scenarios. Sometimes we are not prepared and we had emergencies. That always happens, but it limits, it usually allows us to have some kind of plan for an upcoming shift. And that, helps us a lot.
Okay. I'm also curious, how do you organize your work within the research team? Do you have a backlog of items that are kind of coming in from different teams, and then you somehow, you have your own measure of business value, like you mentioned, of like, okay, how important is this? And you estimate it, and you kind of go with a like you organize it as an Agile team, so to speak, or how do you organize it?
More or less like this. We learn from the developer teams, so we try to use similar methods. It also makes our work slightly more transparent to others. So yes, we use Jira, and we don't have a backlog because we don't like the word backlog. We have selected for research, which is basically the same. We just try to trim it every now and then so that it doesn't grow too big. Then we move the requests or the challenges or items that signify actions within a bigger project, because one project can be multiple, can have multiple Jira tickets. We kind of move it through the progress stages until it's completed. So yes, we take it on board. So the researchers, when they come from dailies of other teams, we have our own daily. And within that daily, we are working on what has been currently in the sprint for us, but also we are putting on Jira things that just came up. So this is the question they asked. And why it's useful and why it's valuable. It's because on those occasions, somebody says, well, they asked me how many people perform this operation, and then somebody else says, oh, I checked it 2 months ago, and we have that. Just give me a second, it's here, and we didn't do much work. So in those scenarios, it's extremely valuable to learn from it. Or maybe we didn't do it, and maybe we have to put some effort. But what we can make ourselves aware is, oh, I tried to look at that part of the system once, and you know what? We haven't, be careful, because if you don't do this or that, you may end up, going in a completely wrong direction. So then the team, this kind of information exchange between researchers really raises the value and speed of delivery by communication. We wouldn't know it if we were only focused on our own team, which is domain specific, and had this lack of sort of daily cooperation with each other.
This sounds really comprehensive and mature on your side. So congratulations on building such a great team. Unfortunately, our time now is coming to an end. Thank you very much for your presentation, for joining AgileByExample again this year, and I hope we'll have an opportunity to host you one more time in the upcoming AgileByExample conferences and learn more about the learnings that you're gaining from working with the product and the teams from the research perspective.